Hello, my name is David Graham. I'm an autistic film student, and this is my short documentary about how autistics, including myself, find relationships and how they hold them. But first, what is autism?
What is the medical term for autism?
Autism is a neurological learning disability.
What can cause it?
Generally, an extreme lack of oxygen at birth, genetics, or you don't know. As in, you don't know about it.
What is the autistic spectrum?
It's a range of different types of autism, as it were. So the easiest way I can describe it is, so if you take an umbrella and the umbrella is the stereotype of autism, and then you take the rain as autism itself, there are billions of different versions and none of them are the same. There are similarities between most autistics, and the key word there is being most. Even then, it's very different for each one.
What does it mean for a person with autism?
Well, the major one is social difficulties.
Can everyone with autism speak?
No.
Can everyone with autism understand what other people mean?
No.
Are autistics very obsessive?
Yes, but I've never done it in my life.
How would a non-verbal autistic person communicate their intelligence?
There's kind of two. They will either just obsess with just doing whatever it is they're obsessed with, or the other thing that they can do is where if you're trying to take that obsession away, they'll physically angry and very upset.
How will this affect their ability to communicate?
Bad. It will most likely be, like in my case, when I'm having a particularly bad day, I either stutter a lot or I end up doing my sort of weird silent screeches, which are pure rage of silence.
Do autistic people make connections with other people easily?
No.
Do autistics struggle to hold on to a relationship?
It's tricky because what I perceive as sort of socially acceptable with some friends who have a similar condition or my condition will just do it and I'll say whatever and I'll get away with blue murder, and then with other people it's not that simple because they're under the belief of what I've said will offend someone, and for me that just doesn't really click at the time.
Is autism a disability or a condition, and should it be used for non-speaking autistics only?
They're not wrong, but that's the extreme scale of the spectrum. It's kind of weird because the spectrum itself essentially gives you a yes/no answer. So you either are or you are not. What the spectrum doesn't do is it doesn't give you a definitive answer of how severe you are. That comes slightly later after a few more tests.
Is autism visible?
Not unless they either were autistic or were in the profession of caring for someone, because it's a bit of a tricky one to spot.
Does that change on a bad day?
Because they're so uncomfortable anyway, everything that they may have learned to be more socially accepted kind of goes out the window, and they're just freaking out. But that freaking out could be physical, could be verbal. In my case, generally generally with my case, when I'm having a particularly bad day, I'm very withdrawn. I tend to hide. Or I end up hurting myself.
Would you say your emotional response is more active?
Yes, a lot of autistics, including myself, really struggle with dealing with emotions in general because they are a lot more active. So for example, when a neurotypical person is cross, an autistic would be angry. When a neurotypical person likes someone, an autistic is more likely to be physically in love with that person. As a single autistic who has never had a relationship in his entire life, I tend to struggle with how dating works as an autistic. So I decided to do some online surveys which consisted of around 10 questions, all to do with relationships, both from a autistic and a non-autistic point of view. I did this both for the different perspectives, and I had a lot more responses than I was expecting. Here are some of the results. It was a 50-50 on whether they were autistic or non-autistic. All of the responses were straight relationships. Over 33% were dating autistic people. Over 83% of people had been dating someone 6 years or over. After the surveys, I was lucky enough to get an interview with Kaylee and her husband. What was your first impressions?
He was funny and probably a little bit different to anybody that I'd dated before. Personality wise, he was just very prominent, you know, with his personality and how he acted.
When you first met him, did you suspect he might be autistic?
No, I only had like a little bit of an awareness of autism really.
What's it been like since you two have been married?
Oh, very, I think like any marriage it is very up and down, you know. Some days are harder than others, and also communication sometimes. I think when you date someone who is autistic you have to have a lot more understanding.
How would you describe a bad day?
The bad days are bad. there's no in between really.
What are the triggers for a bad day usually?
So I definitely say the biggest one is lack of sleep. So if we kept each other up, he suffers with his arm, that's just a bad day straight away. If we've planned something and you want to change that plan, you can't do that last minute. You have to give him a time period, I suppose, to process that has now changed. If you ask him to do something that's outside his comfort zone, like, so he's not very comfortable cooking, but if I'm on a late shift at work, I'm like, you need to cook, and he gets all very flustered. And
what helps you cope?
Family really. I think I'm quite lucky with family and friends that we have, because they have more of an understanding than I ever did. So sometimes if I'm very frustrated, they'll kind of be like, yeah, well, you know, look at it this way, and then that makes a difference.
What's a good day like?
A good day where we both get up and there's kind of no plans made. It's just we get up and we decide we want to do something together. I think they make everything a little bit less stressful because he hasn't got any inhibitions in his head of what we're going to do that day.
How do you find sort of social interactions as a couple?
Stressful. Stressful. Not so much with family, because like, they know and they understand, but anyone who's kind of new, quirky, or in their own bubble, or not great in social circumstances, I think it makes it a lot more stressful for me, because I'm worried about not only him but other people.
What's the best thing about being married?
He's very caring, probably more caring than anyone I've ever gone out with. He's very soft, he's very present as well, like he wants to be around, he doesn't want to go out all the time. This
interview from Kaylee's husband's point of view was very interesting to me, as he's only just within the last year been diagnosed as an autistic. When were you officially sort of diagnosed as an autistic?
Just very, very recently. I always had problems communicating with people, never realising it, always putting my foot in my mouth like constantly, and then very quickly at such a young age realised I was alienating myself from everyone because anything I said annoying people. So I always thought, why could no one understand me, why could no one get along with me, why does always someone have a problem with me? And when I was a kid, autism, even though it was a thing, it was usually based on people who are non-verbal. So anybody who could speak, they weren't autistic, they were just weirdos.
Did you get any sense of sort of like relief?
I did a little bit, because it's like, that's the reason no one likes me. And that's the reason I piss everyone off.
Bit of clarification as it
Yeah, the tics as well, like I had weird things that I do, like sensual things, like touch my eyebrows, touch my ears, and then if I see a curtain, I'm compelled to go up and touch it.
If you were to describe a bad day from a point of view of like what it does sort of up here, how would you describe it to someone?
A bad day? That's a good question. I mean, you're gonna hate this answer, but I try not to blame anything that happens in a bad day scenario. I try not to go, it must be because I'm autistic. I don't think you should do that. Being autistic is just a condition that I have, but it doesn't define who I am. So a bad day, I'm not going to put it down to being autistic. There's so many variables within a life situation. But to make it simpler, I guess for me, what really upsets me and irritates me and can be bad is when I try to communicate with somebody and I can't get on their level and what I'm trying to say, it's just coming out wrong, and all I'm doing is offending them.
What was your biggest sort of fear?
Oof, wow, that's a deep one. People just not getting me, and it did happen quite a bit. Like I had to a lot of the time. So when it comes to relationships, and not just in relationships, sometimes even when being friendships or being around people, I sometimes put on a facade because I have to put on a facade that makes me feel like I'm being normal, or what normal is perceived to be. And that is what I used to do all the time, whether it be in the acting environment that I've been in, as well, probably more so in the acting environment. And then when I started meeting women.
So what have we learned on this journey? Well, for the neurotypical person, I hope I've given you an insight into what autism actually is and the fact that we are approachable. It might take us some time to break in, but we are approachable and we can be loyal friends, and maybe, in the right circumstances, could become very good in a relationship. For the autistic person, I hope I've given you an idea that there are coping strategies and ways to support yourselves and your partner in the relationship, and to give yourselves a chance at having a long-term relationship. And I hope if you're a parent who has watched this, who has a child or a young adult with autism, I hope that this short documentary has given you insight into how they may struggle with holding their long-term relationship and how you may support them. For myself personally, this has been a very interesting journey, as I have not only been challenged on my own perspectives of what autism is and how people deal with it, it has given me hope and ideas about how I can support any relationships that I have in the near future. Fingers crossed.